I think it's automatic.
Okay. Uh, yeah, it seems to be doing it. All right, well, we're going to record. Okay. Um, all right, so welcome everybody. This is our Scholars Forum in the Catholic intellectual tradition, as you all know. The forum consists of faculty talking about their recently published or soon to be published books related in one way or another with the Catholic intellectual tradition. And it takes place on Teams, usually monthly, on Wednesday at 4 p.m. It's sponsored by the University Core, the Catholic Studies Program, the Catholic Studies Center, and Immaculate Conception Seminary School of Theology. And it's an exciting expression of harvesting our treasures, and our faculty scholars truly are among those treasures. I'm going to be introducing Jon specifically, and I'm honored to do that. So I just want to say that, I mean, I have known Jon Radwan for probably 2 decades. He's a very good friend to me personally and a good friend to the core. So this is our third and final session of the fall semester. So we're very happy to be having Jon, who is a professor in the Department of Communication and the director of the Institute for Communication and Religion, the ICR, both of these in Seton Hall's College of Human Development, Culture, and Media. And I happen to be a member of the ICR, so I know all the wonderful stuff that they do firsthand. Jon will be discussing his very recent book, Ethics in Contact Rhetoric, Communication and the Dance of Bodies and Power, which came out with Rowman and Littlefield in December. So it's just out this month, 2024. He's also published numerous articles and does conference presentations. And I'm just going to mention two of his articles. I mean, I could mention a whole bunch of them, but these are particularly interesting to me, I guess you could say, for certain reasons. Um, the one is an article that Jon did with Ellen Paul, who was a student here, and she happened to be in my class as well. I know Ellen, and she's wonderful. And the article is called Catholics and Latter-day Saints, A History and a Coming Together. And it's in the Journal of Dialogic Ethics, Interfaith, and Interhuman Perspectives. This is a wonderful collaboration. I know, Jon, you did a conference with Ellen also. She and you worked together on a conference while she was here at Seton Hall. She's really an outstanding student, and I just love this, faculty-student collaboration. So that's the one article I wanted to mention. And the second one is an article that Jon worked on with Roger Alfani, who I think most of you know well, one of our core fellows, wonderful professor here. And that is entitled Communicating Transcendent Love, Interpersonal Encounter and Church-State Transitions in Fratelli Tutti, which is by Pope Francis. And this was included in a special volume of Religions, which I believe was edited also by another Seton Hall person. What was the name of the person, Jon? You're going to have to help me.
Joe Rene Formicola was our editor.
Giovanni Formicola from the Department of Political Science. And this is such a great example of collaboration. And you know how they came about writing this? It was during COVID, and Roger was helping with Jon's class, right? Because Jon, you had during that point you were not able to be in person, and we were having that thing where you had some classes would run with the faculty member. The main faculty member would be on remote, and then they'd have another person there in the classroom. And Roger was that person. So they got talking and they ended up writing this wonderful article, which eventually got an award. So it really is a beautiful example of, I guess you could say, turning a bad thing into a really good thing. So, and wonderful faculty collegiality. So anyway, those are just two I could have mentioned many others, but as director of the ICR, Jon oversees a variety of interesting projects, one of which is CoreCast. And that's a series of podcasts featuring a faculty member and a student selected by the professor discussing a core text from either Core 1 or Core 2. Several of us have done it, including myself. And it's really fun to do. I really enjoyed doing it, but it's also very meaningful to have this sort of two, faculty lens and a student lens looking at the same text. I happen to do Perpetua's Passio, a text that I'm very interested in, and I did it with Frank Hunter, that many of you know. And eventually a book came out of this, and Todd actually did an essay for that book. Frank is now teaching for us in the Corps, but anyway, he was my student at one point, and it's a wonderful program, and I just if you get a chance, you should. I encourage everybody to look at some of the Corps casts. Um, and so anyway, I'm really excited to be presenting my dear friend and colleague, Jon Radwan. He has been, as I said, such a good friend to the Corps, as well as to me personally. He serves on the University Corps Curriculum Committee. Whenever he possibly can, he teaches Core 1 or Core 2. And he's been a mentor to other faculty and continues to be that. So I'm happy now to turn it over to you, Jon.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen, everybody. I worked hard on my PowerPoint. Are you seeing it yet?
Not yet, Jon. Not yet. I
Great.
did make you a presenter, so
Yeah.
let me just check that and make sure.
For a while.
Are you
tea today? I'm sorry.
Are you gonna do a little dance for us, Mayor?
I'm actually starting to take adult tap class in the spring, so you'll have to wait, but maybe at the talent show.
All right, there you go.
Anybody
Okay,
who's interested, let me know. My niece will be
I
teaching.
would love to see that. All right, I think Jon, we are seeing it.
Okay. I hope you're seeing a slightly different view than I am, but I'm happy to try to talk you through. My view makes it small. I hope you're able to read it.
We're just
Um,
seeing a blue screen at this point.
Perfect. All right. So
Now we're
now you
seeing
should.
Pope Francis and Pope Benedict.
Fantastic. So this is my opening image. My name is Jon Radwan, and I really like to study the popes. And so here's an interesting image. People who like to interpret the church politically might see a liberal and a conservative meeting and embracing, but someone who understands more about contact within church tradition would see two brothers embracing. The idea I'm trying to work with is that there's strong continuity when you study the popes. And so things that Pope Benedict XVI would say are very, very similar, if not directly the same, as what Pope Francis might say. Pope Francis frequently quotes Pope Benedict XVI, and so do I. So here's an opening quote from Pope Benedict XVI in his encyclical Deus Caritas Est. Those who draw near to God do not withdraw from men, but rather become truly close to them. So that theme of true closeness and embracing one another is really central to my research as a rhetorician and a communication scholar. My talk today is called Contact and Rhetoric in Deus Caritas Est, which translates as God is Love. And as Nancy mentioned earlier, this is coming out of my new book, which is not quite out yet, but should be out any day now. Mostly what my new book is about is trying to rethink the field of communication and rhetoric from a Christian and especially Catholic perspective. And what ends up happening is you really need to decenter media and start to center contact to understand papal teaching, especially in Deus Caritas Est. So here's another quote. It's a little bit longer, but again, I'm a big fan of Benedict XVI. And so this is one of his earlier documents on the structure of prayer. So if you took prayer as like a normal communication person, it's kind of like sending messages back and forth. When you read this quote, prayer starts to be about relationship and bonding, and ultimately the Trinity becomes a cycle of gift. So I'll read it to you. Only because there is already speech, or logos, in God can there be speech, logos, to God. Philosophically, we could put it like this. The Logos in God is the ontological foundation for prayer. The prologue of John's Gospel speaks of this connection in its very first sentences. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was in communication with God, as a more precise translation of the Greek pros suggests, rather than the usual with God. It expresses the act of turning to God, of relationship. Since there is a relationship within God Himself, there can also be a participation in this relationship. Thus, we can relate to God in a way that does not contradict His nature. So there's a lot going on there, but as a communication person, it's really revolutionary. The Pope just retranslated the opening of John's Gospel and replaced a kind of passive preposition with by putting my field at the center of the Trinity. And so when I read things like this, they're very provocative, and I want to try to follow through and see what it means for, as I mentioned before, rhetoric and the field of communication, and especially communication ethics. So I've been working on this for decades now, and finally got a book together. I led a research team. There were four of us. And so Dale Seifert is a professor emerita from the University of Northern Iowa. And Ellen Gorshevsky is a professor of communication and media at Bowling Green State. And Omar Schwartz is a professor of political science at Colorado State University. And the title, Ethics in Contact Rhetoric, is mostly where I'm ending up now. That rhetoric really shouldn't be understood as symbols flying back and forth, such as a prayer trying to reach up to God through discourse. Rather, ethics and rhetoric need to be understood first and foremost from physical contact, such as the embrace that we started this presentation with. And the metaphor that I use to unpack those embraces is dance, that we are necessarily embodied. We enact interpersonal power in relational cycles that can be described with vocabulary from the field of dance. So that's what I'm at today. If I state it as a formal abstract, it sounds like this. Communication is not what you think it is. The root of the word communication is munus, and the plural form is munera, and it's Latin for gift. And then, of course, co on the beginning means that it's a mutual gift, and shun on the end means that it's a process. So, communication, properly understood, is a gift cycle that brings the participants into a sense of bond and mutuality. When I read Deus Caritas Est, I see Pope Benedict XVI asking us to orient toward touch and physical contact between people. That's immediate. There's no media involved when you embrace someone. Rather, it's incarnate, co-felt, meaningful touch, contact. Pope Benedict teaches in the encyclical that love of God is enacted through embodied love of neighbor. That's where rhetoric happens. That's where influence happens. Hearts turn when we feel beloved, when we feel concrete, embodied love of neighbor. And so, if we want to understand spiritual rhetoric, we really can't use political assumptions or modernistic individuality. And then, especially to understand the Catholic tradition, we need to look before and below media, discourse, and symbolism toward our embodied relational patterns. So it's not that symbolism and discourse aren't important, they are. It's just that traditional rhetorical theory centers them, such as a sender, message, channel, receiver model that many students have been forced to memorize. It puts media at the center, and I want to put bodies physically touching one another in both love and then unfortunately violence. The stroke and the strike belong at the center of communication. So my research question simply tries to ask, what if we do that? What does it really mean to center closeness and touch in our understanding of humanity and communication and religion? To preview today, I've got three main points and only two of them have slides. So I'll do my best to speak through what is Deus Caritas Est uh, first without its slide because I sadly deleted it. Then I'll explain to you what contact is. And my last point is what's rhetoric. So to begin, uh, this audience especially should know what Deus Caritas Est is, but we're being recorded. So for people who might not know, Joseph Ratzinger became Pope Benedict XVI in 2005, and at the beginning of 2006, he released his inaugural encyclical letter. In our core, we study transformation and change, which is really the same dynamic as rhetoric when we change one another, when we influence one another. So the change from Ratzinger to Benedict XVI was surprising to many people. Prior to his elevation to Pope, Joseph Ratzinger had the job of being the prefect for the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, which is the church institution formerly known as the Inquisition. So it was the doctrinal police, and he had a political power type reputation as someone who was bringing the hammer down on heretics for decades. And then that same person with that tough reputation was elevated to Pope, and he launched his papacy with a letter about love, a letter about care, a letter not about correcting people and heresy, rather about going back to the basics of the faith and helping everybody understand that love is God, that God is love. That's the translation for Deus Caritas Est. And the encyclical itself has two main parts. The first part is more theological and anthropological. It explains what God is and it explains what humanity is. So I already did a little bit about what God is when I did the quote on Trinitarian relation. If we study what humanity is, it's a Christian anthropology, a way of understanding humans as relational beings and connected to and needing one another. And so the Judeo-Christian tradition is ancient, it's not modern. So we're very used to thinking of ourselves in modernist, individualistic terms where we're all divided from one another and separate. A Christian anthropology refuses that dynamic and rather says that we are necessarily integrated, we are necessarily together. So that's the theology, Trinitarian relation, and the anthropology of necessary connection. And then the second part of Deus Caritas Est is about how to put love into practice. It's about the church as a community of love. And it's really a wonderful section because if you just do theology, Christianity could feel like an idea. But when you start to look at how to practice it, and especially how to practice it at the mass corporate level with a whole global organization of the church, it becomes a really beautiful dynamic of how to integrate care into our relational networks. And so Benedict's teaching on charity is the second half of the encyclical. Charity in the Christian tradition is organized, it's agenda free, and it's really striving to connect with humanity because drawing truly close to humanity is the same thing as drawing truly close to God. So that's my first point. Deus Caritas Est is a love letter from Pope Benedict XVI, teaching the basics of the faith about how God is love, how humans are made for one another, and how the church is striving to be a global community of love, inviting everyone into holistic relation. My second point transitions with this image here. I see an elder hand holding a child hand, so maybe a grandparent and a grandchild. And before I started this research, I honestly didn't know. I'm telling you now, if you don't know, there's a National Join Hands Day. Every May at the beginning, we could practice some of this caring contact by the simple gesture of reaching out and holding hands with someone. Note the difference between sending a message and holding hands. Sending a message presumes that there's a gap, and you really don't necessarily know that your message is going to be received. And then, really, when you think about it, time's evolving. So the message that you sent is never going to be quite the message that's received, even if they do get it. And that's wildly different than what we see in people holding hands. It's simultaneous and co-felt shared meaning. So this is what I want to center. I want to center physical contact between human beings, skin on skin. So to do that, we need to have a good definition of what contact is. One simple way is just to divide the word, right? So if tact is touch and co or con is with, then it's touch with. So if you think about touching an object like a desk, that's just you, and you're the only one who feels it because there's nothing sensitive or no animate being on the other side. But when we touch one another, it's joint mutual meaning. And so try to think about it for a little bit. Where did we come from? We came from contact. Skin on skin sexual reproduction is us. And so our life starts there, and then we're embodied. So it's our visceral center. You can't really get away from your body, you're always with it. If we follow the psychology of Eric Berne, the fundamental unit of social exchange is the stroke. So none of us would survive without nurture. As we're born, we literally require repeated caring stroke patterns to get past at least toddler level. And then, of course, there's violence too. So physical contact, when it makes its violent turn, is the strike. That's where joint relating and mutual feeling come from. That's the core of communication. Our human development begins in and through meaningful interpersonal contact. It's not that we're not logos beings, we are, but we grow into logos later. And our bodies don't go away. We superpose our language and symbolism over our physical substrate. The contrast with really most of my field is that they're concerned with, rhetoricians and communication theorists are concerned with, the colloquial phrasing is sending messages and targeting audiences. The more formal theoretical language is speech act or symbolic act. And so symbolic action and speech acts, it's not that they don't exist, it's that they slice a joint process too fine. They're modernist understandings of communication that begin with individuals who are divided across a gulf rather than people who are already in contact and already feeling one another. So what most of the field is doing, and it's not new, it's been around since Aristotle, is looking at communication and messaging as a tool. It's an instrumental way to use a persuasive means to advance an agenda. And so in Aristotle, some of the agendas are, they're ethical agendas, like defending yourself when you're sued, but still, it's an instrumental attempt at influence rather than a joint love dynamic that's already unfolding. So to try to summarize this in an equation, I find in Christianity an integral ontology. The nature of being is integrated. When we look at our biology, we see that we grow out of joint sexual reproduction. Plus, it takes a long time for us to do anything by ourselves. We're not individuals. We're first infants and toddlers. And so that makes our basis that we're social animals. In Benedict's phrasing, the law of ecstasis gets at this idea that it's a law that we will go out from ourselves and meet others, that encounter is how we work. So note the phrasing here. This is the law of ecstasis says it's immediate. The law is not that we're going to send a message or post a tweet or whatever they're called now. Rather, the law is that we're going to be incarnate, we're going to have bodies, and we are going to make contact. It will be immediate relating. That is our required formative basis. And so here's one of my favorite quotes from Deus Caritas Est. Being a part of Christianity, it's not really about abstract philosophies and choices. Rather, it's the encounter with an event and a person that gives our lives a new horizon and a decisive direction. So, especially we see this when Benedict contrasts the discursive command approach to love, such as like a command, the Ten Commandments, to say honor father and mother. That's a good one. That can be interpreted as an instrument reaching across a gap. But when you start to look at Jesus's incarnation, you start to see joint contact, that love is a response to, human love is a response to divine love. And so this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to position physical contact and touch between people rather than individual use of language as the ultimate locus for all meaning. Here's a cool image. It was developed by AI. You can take my grade down if you want, but I cited it. What the image is trying to represent, that the machine is trying to map for us, is how influence works itself out in society. And so at the center, you have someone speaking with a megaphone. And then there's also maybe in the lower right, some mediated type of interactions. And then maybe at the top left, it might be something more scholarly or even artistic. It's a lot of people relating and influencing one another. And so this is what I study. I study rhetoric. When I say rhetoric, what I mean is best explained by the Platonic tradition. So rather than Aristotle, where you've got instruments, bridging gaps, used as means to persuade people who are divided from you, Plato takes a spiritual approach where leadership is leadership of people, and people are spiritual beings with souls. So rather than be any kind of political target power move, it's always spiritual. We're always dealing with spiritual beings. So a good rhetor, a noble rhetor, is someone who's helping develop good spirit, eudaimonia. And then a base rhetor, an ignoble rhetor, is somebody who's spreading dysdaimonia, bad spirit and chaos. The spirit is always there. It doesn't disappear. It's some kind of daimonia. The question is, are you leading people toward a good spirit or a more chaotic spirit? As I tried to establish with the contact point, to understand rhetoric, start with a real ground and center in your body. Physical performance is where, even if you want to think about mediation, like typing is still a physical act, and talking to the AI to get it to draw that image is still an act. I have to articulate and move my hands. Kenneth Burke is our premier rhetorician from the 20th century. He's a giant in my field. Everybody, at least everybody I know in the humanistic side of rhetoric, has to speak Burkean. And then in his later work, Burke wrote a famous book called The Rhetoric of Religion, but most of my field is secular, so they leave that book alone. I spend a lot of time with that book. And there, Burke takes all of the symbolic action stuff that I was critiquing before and backs off from it and reminds us that always beneath all the words flying around, there will be a physical dance, the dance of bodies. What this is trying to explain is that symbolism is great, but it presupposes and rests upon physically performed engagement patterns. And coming back to Benedict XVI, hearts are turned when we engage one another in loving patterns. When we want to have successful long-term rhetoric, something that makes a change and gets somebody to continue in that decisive direction, that's the ultimate in communication. That's the beauty of communication and persuasion. So again, rhetoricians study influence and change. In spiritual rhetoric, we talk about conversion. Vert is the key word there, the root word, and that's to turn. And so to convert is to turn with. There are other turns you could make. You could turn from, and so that's perversion, or you could try to turn inside, and that's introversion. But I hope you might recall the law of ecstasis from 2 slides ago. The law is that you have to turn out. You're going to be born, you're going to come out. And when you come out, you're going to meet people. First, you're going to meet primary caregivers, and it's going to be physical contact that is that primary care. And then as we grow and develop, we continue those patterns, even though we superpose language over them. So as I study these vert patterns, I see us dancing relational attitudes before one another. Our practices and our rituals, the daily cycles that we do, are all not just about us, they're about bonds and networks and relationships between all of us. So to take some a Catholic word and take a look at it, like communication theorists are very comfortable talking about information, but very few have given thought to the process of formation, which is, of course, a key word for Catholic education, that a piece of information is not separate from me. As I encounter that piece of information, it starts to form me, it starts to affect me. And then, especially when I put it into a ritual practice that's repeated, it's highly formative. It creates me, it makes me into who I am. And then, for another word to kind of pick apart a little bit. Uh, Media, of course, is symbolism. It's the between. It's the something in between us. Instead of making our exclusive focus for communication, how media works, we need to recognize that in media, both in its time sense of being right here, right now, and also its space sense of being nothing in between, that's an important thing to understand if you're going to understand how rhetoric works. So, as I've mentioned a few times now, and as you might have recalled from the title of the book, the master metaphor that I'm working for contact as it unfolds is dance. Dance is the art that moves bodies in relation to other bodies. It's meaningful and joint. So, my theorist that I worked studied a lot for this book is Rudolf Laban. He's fascinating. 20th century figure whose theories are the foundation not only of much modern dance, but also industrial movement and effort theory. A phrase of his, half a sentence, that pulls a lot of his vocabulary together is right here. Bodily movements they follow the law of ecstasis. They have to go out. They're going to go out and evolve in space as well as in time. In this evolution of movement, the weight of the body is brought into flow. And so I'll try to explain that to you in a diagram on the next slide. But there's 4 factors going on there: space, time, weight, and flow. Here's a nice picture from Salvador Dali of people dancing. I really like it because it's, of course, a static image, but it gets at the cyclical and contact elements that I like to think about, that the dancers themselves are spinning and they're also spinning together. They're together carving an orbit across the dance floor. So when you put Laban's theory together with contact, you get something like this. If we start up at the top, there are two basic attitudes that we can bring when we encounter one another. An indulgent attitude is when we adapt to one another, and a fighting attitude is when we refuse to adapt and even start trying to push the other to exert power and control. And so there's a couple of my students here. I hope they might remember that I think of an indulgent attitude as fairly balanced and a fighting attitude as doing a power imbalance. Somebody's trying to exert dominance, and when one person is empowered, the other person is frequently disempowered. On the left-hand side of the diagram, those are the four contact patterns from Laban: space, time, weight, and flow. And then as we go to the center of the diagram, we say, all right, if you want to interpret relational movement in space, an indulgent attitude is when we mutually approach one another, because again, back to Benedict XVI, we're destined for that. We're made for one another. We could fight it, though. We could try to get away, and that's called withdrawal. It's really hard to get away because we're social beings. So even if you try to be a hermit, uh, people tend to find you. And then most of us aren't that extreme. Our withdrawal is only partial, and we usually end up just approaching other people rather than whoever we're uh, rather than whoever we were with before. On time, I think we're mostly used to this vocabulary after we came out of COVID with all of our different learning methods. So synchrony is when we indulge one another and start to work on the same cycle of beats. So we sync up our schedules. We all agree to meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2 o'clock for class. And then asynchrony is the fighting attitude when we try to get away from somebody else's cyclical beat. So a student who refuses to go to class or frequently comes late is asynchronous. They're fighting the beat of the school day. Weight is next. Weight is how much power and force we're bringing to the interaction. And in class, I use a duel to explain this one. So it sounds a little bit odd because you want to call a duel a fight, but when you think of fair fights, like people who agree to meet at dawn and both bring swords, they're concordant. They've agreed to resolve their difference. Unfortunately, they're resolving it with violence, but it's at least an equal balanced fair fight. They've agreed to what's happening. A discordant encounter would be if someone was cheating at the duel and brought a gun or a bazooka or something. It's a fighting attitude rather than indulgent. And then the bottom one is flow. Flow is the prevailing direction of movement. In my view, and I think in Benedict's view, our prevailing direction is toward one another. It's toward the bond. And so right now, we're in an educational flow. We're learning from me about Benedict XVI and what I learned about communication from him. And as we start using this vocabulary together, we adapt to one another and we build our bond. We could also fight. We could try to free ourselves from that bond. We could try to go it alone, but it's really not going to last very long because we're social animals and we require one another. So this is the basic chorutic vocabulary that I'm proposing to replace, or not really replace, but counterbalance the traditional vocabulary of rhetorical criticism. So like Kenneth Burke, his vocabulary is based around the symbolic act. So act, scene, agent, agency, and purpose are his 5 things to look for and interpret rhetoric with. For me, none of that's relational. It's all focused on the rhetor and their output, their compositional act. I want to instead pay attention to people in physical patterns, such as an embrace or a dance. And so these terms of space, time, weight, and flow with the relational attitudes helps me do that. So there's really, of course, much more to the book. This is just one section. But as I head into the conclusion, these are the ideas I'm trying to get toward. My research question asks, well, what does it mean if we center closeness and touch? Here's some of the things I think it means. First, we can't get sucked into modernity. We can't have an ethic of utilitarianism where our communication is about strategic manipulation and targeting audiences. It's just, it's not that it never happens or anything like that, but when we really think about it, just because I sent something doesn't mean you received it and understood it and were influenced by it. And in contrast, when I touch you, you're probably going to know what I mean by it. We're both going to know what we mean by it. There's strokes and strikes as we embrace, as we shake hands, as we punch one another. They're simultaneous, co-felt, mutually understood meaning. Next, this one's from Pope John Paul II, but I know Benedict XVI likes it too. The hermeneutic of the gift is what I was trying to get at before with the definition of communication. Munus and munera are the root of our whole process. And so try to, as you look around, see what's being given and what's being received. And are those gift patterns more balanced, or are they something that's more imbalanced? When you balance it, it starts to bloom into a long-term relational pattern. It builds community. And ultimately, that's the goal of the church, to build global community. And then, as I mentioned, I think it's important to at least supplement traditional communication criticism vocabulary with embodied relational vocabulary drawn from dance. So space, time, weight, and flow are the four attitudinal dance variables that we should be tracking. And then lastly, we should recognize discourse and symbolism for what they are. They are important, but they're important outgrowths from a more basic and fundamental biomaterial relational practice. So that's my talk for you all today. I talked about contact and rhetoric and how I learned about it from Pope Benedict XVI in Deus Caritas Est. Thank you for listening. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, John. That was really wonderful and I really, really rich. And I can see why students love your classes, because you're a really good teacher in terms of getting this across, these complex ideas. One thing that, and we're going to open it up for questions. And I think Elizabeth was kind enough to, I asked her to handle that because Maribel was not able to be here today. But I did want to say that I was thinking of the poem by W.H. Auden, New Year Letter, where he talks, it's really to Christ, and he talks about calling it his true love to the dance. And I thought that, really what you were saying goes along with that. It's one of my favorite poems, and it's that beautiful idea. He talks about the logos, I think, and he also, but calling the true love to the. I love that connection of things. So anyway, thank you. And Elizabeth, do you want to just, you can moderate. I don't know if anybody has any questions. If they want to put in the chat or just raise their hand or whatever. But I'm going to put you in charge of it if you don't mind.
Perfect. I'm just, my camera's off because I'm plugging in my laptop, which nobody needs to see. So, but I can hear. And 1 second, I'm just going to plug it in, and then I'll give people a minute to think of questions, and then I will be right back. Because I definitely, okay.
I think we have a question from Dr. Stockdale.
Perfect. Dr. Stockdale, go ahead.
Okay, thanks everybody. Hey, thank you, John. I just want to say what Nancy said. I so appreciate your presentation, just to appreciate how you communicate this material in such an accessible way. That's so helpful. And again, as she mentioned, jealous of your students who get to sit with you and learn this from you. Just first a comment and then a question. As you were talking, John, and I hesitate to even put this out here because it's been so long since I've read the text that I can't even be sure exactly what the metaphor was standing in for. But I'm reminded of Miroslav Volf's Exclusion and Embrace, where he uses that metaphor, well, the contact metaphor with reconciliation and peace building. But anyway, the question I had. I really like the sense of embodiment and the sense of contact and touch, but just kind of going back to those communication models. Maybe I'm too old-fashioned with those communication models, but if there is such a thing, and I know you're trying to kind of collapse that, and not say that there's this sender and receiver, but there is such a thing as sender and receiver with contact. do you deal with the possibility of messages being misunderstood with physical touch?
Right. Sure, it's possible, right? So like seduction is false love, and it has a physical component to it. And so sure, plenty of hearts have been broken by seducers. And I mostly want to say though that that kind of deception is really not the root, because the root is infant nurture. So you're really not deceiving an infant as you clean and groom and feed. The stroke's fundamental dynamic is one of nurture and care. So sure, we can grow into manipulative individuals. And so that contact that you're describing that's disingenuous is called manipulation. And so I think some of my students are still here. They all know that manos is Spanish for hands. And so manipulation is an inappropriate use of those hands. It's still contact, and it's a metaphor when we talk about symbols manipulating us, but it's still the same function. It's treating the other as another. It's treating the other as a target. It's dehumanizing the other as it manipulates and skews their perception and provokes responses that are not tied to reality. So that's kind of how I handle that one. The root is still nurture.
Great. Thank you, Jon.
Other questions? I so enjoyed this. And I agree, Nancy and Todd. I wish I could just take everybody's classes. Any other? I guess I have a question, Jon, which is like, and I know you have some students on this call, but I imagine just thinking about this kind of message with my own kids, who missed so much during the pandemic. And I know I was just talking to some students today about that, where, and I understand why it had to be this way, but education was without any kind of physicality. And, we all experienced this. And just how and I appreciate that you used an AI image that was actually really helpful. So I just been like dealing with AI stuff all day from Journey faculty and my own grading. And how do you think AI and this whole technological issue relates to your research? And I guess I'm going into a million different directions because
Yeah.
it was such a good presentation that has me thinking about so much. But I keep reading about how, one of our crises right now are isolated young people who their relationships are just with technology and they're not physically touching anybody. Um, so this is just what it made me feel that this is so important. And the Pope's words that you brought to us are so important. But I just wondered if your students, I would think that my students would really respond to that aspect of the research.
Yeah, thank you. It's another diagram, so I wish I had it to share right now. But if we accept contact at the center, the next zone out is mediated contact, where I poke you with a stick and you poke me back. There's something in between. Uh, when you go to the next zone out away from contact, that's where you get to virtual contact or the semblance of contact at distance. And so that's what we're doing now. It it feels like contact. It's pretty good. I'm glad you all are here. Our basic hunger is social hunger is for recognition. And so we're devoting energy to one another right now. We're recognizing one another. We're engaged in a gift dynamic. And it is a beautiful thing, but what it's not is physical contact. So it's the semblance of contact at distance. It's not a bad thing. It's not to avoid. We just need to recognize it for what it is. And so a lot of online research talks about tenuous bonds built online. That it's not that they're not bonds. You do know your online networks, but when there's a problem that comes by, the bond is not going to last. It's going to fall apart. And so people fairly easily can ghost one another online. And then when you're in a close proximity type of network, that's much more difficult, if not impossible. So, like, especially if we go back toward child rearing, the child, uh, I guess teenagers can lock themselves in their room, but overall, you can't ghost your family. They're right there. It's immediate relational contact dynamics, even if you're not hugging every day. And so, yes, it is a problem through the pandemic as we start leaning more into the semblance of contact rather than the physical contact itself. And then mostly, I think it's just helping people understand that this is what it is. And so, again, it's not that likes online or online classes aren't good. They are, but they're not the root. They're not the basis. They're not our most fundamental need. Um, if you keep going out past the semblance of contact, that's when you get to act. And so that's mass mediated communication where you're hoping it might land somewhere. So so it's kind of not like this right now, but when this is done, there will be a recording and Nancy will post it to YouTube. That starts to turn this event out of contact, again, semblance because it's mediated, and it starts to turn it into an act. It's a hopeful act. I hope it lands somewhere. I hope somebody picks it up and feels inspired and does some more work, but there's no guarantee of that. And so that's the kind of challenge with my field is most of the field has been studying people lobbing messages outward in hopes of strategy and effect. And I'm trying to counterbalance that with a center built around nurture, built around hugs, built around, and then also, unfortunately, of course, violence is right there too. Um, Violence is not primary, though. We're born out of the stroke, and then the aggressive turn of the stroke is the strike. I hope I answered some of that, Elizabeth.
Yeah, that's really helpful, and it's helpful for me thinking about teaching Laudato Si and the section on technology, and Pope Francis writes so beautifully about that. Any other questions?
I guess just since you cited Laudato Si, I would say a lot of that media understanding I learned from Pope Francis in Fratelli Tutti
Mm-hmm.
and with the project I did with Roger Alfani on that one. So I think I started off this presentation saying I really like studying the popes. The reason why is that they keep teaching me things. There's a lot
Mm-hmm.
in there.
Yeah.
And everybody should read all of them. But if you're looking for one that explains the social media dystopia that's evolving globally right now, it's in Fratelli Tutti.
Mm. Go ahead, Matthew. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, thanks so much. This gave me a lot of food for thought. I'm involved in my parish, and I'm actually in charge of writing some curriculum for my son's scouting troop. They've added a large faith formation portion to it, and one of the things that they require, both at the parish school and in this Trail Life Scouting program, is a handshake. So when the children leave the school, they shake their teacher's hand before their parents pick them up, and then part of the scouting troop as well. There's also a particular handshake that the trailmen have to do, and then from that same ministry, all the dads get together. And we were having a conversation last night about kind of how we've lost sense of community in terms of just being together, right? Like we're called to love our neighbor, but I don't even know like the people that live right next to me, I don't know their names. So how do I love my neighbor and I don't know the people next to me? But we're just having this conversation about not necessarily contact, but just being physically present with one another. I don't know if there's any uh, correlation between the physical contact and then just like physical presence as well.
Yeah, definitely there is. Benedict XVI in Deus Caritas S calls it personal presence in the giving. So it's not that like an anonymous unknown donation that's going somewhere and you don't really know where. It's not that that's a bad thing, but as a practice, it's supposed to be somebody physically reaching out and giving a hand up. And so handshakes are great, but they're kind of among equals. And so yes, they're important, but the whole latter section of the encyclical is about the exercise of charity. And so that's, I think, more of pulling up, reaching out and grabbing on and pulling up. And that's something that he very explicitly says is really, it's not about like efficiency. It's something that's a supra rational gift, where if your mind isn't in it and your heart isn't in it, it's not going to have the desired effect. It might sort of help out the person on the other side, but often with donation type charity, the receiver is still on the other side of a gap and still feeling like there's some kind of burden or problem rather than a brother. And so the universalized neighbor is another fantastic theme from the encyclical. So it's true that we don't personally know each other as neighbors. Like you kind of can't, right? After the population hits a certain point, you can't know everybody, but you can regard them all as neighbors. You can regard them all as people worthy of presence in the giving, that as you shake hands, you're not distracted and looking at your phone. You're actually smiling and looking in the eye and trying to make a brotherly connection that builds up community. So it's wonderful to hear about this work, and I hope you continue it, and then maybe consider some additional contact patterns. It's tough in our culture because we've got a lot of like I mentioned before with seduction, we've got a lot of misguided sexuality and misunderstanding of how bodies are. It really, for me, comes down to individualism. And so the universalized neighbor and brotherhood and sisterhood is the opposite ethic. It's no, this person is not other than you. This person is related to you. This person, in the biggest sense, it starts to become this person is God, as I from Matthew, right? As I treat the other person as you did to least my brethren, so you did it to me. And so, like, how are you going to shake God's hand? Is it going to be different from how you're shaking your neighbor's hand? Well, if it is, then maybe rethink it through a little bit and try to figure out how you might shake God's hand and try to bring that attitude to the next encounter at the scout meeting.
That was
Are,
an amazing answer. Thank you.
yeah, it's just really so rich. And I just I'm thinking of Arabelle, that she's not here, but she always she always calls you her mentor, John, and she loves the papal encyclicals as well. She just absolutely loves them. And there's so much in there. But I think what you're saying about like the need, I don't know, like I've just taught Dorothy Day today, and we had Dorothy Day's granddaughter here, and it's like Dorothy Day embodied that. Like I
Yep.
showed my students a clip of Dorothy Day saying, if your neighbor comes to you and he's hungry, you don't just say be warm and be filled. It's like echoing James's letter, but you give him something to eat, and that's the whole basis of the Catholic worker. And I think that's what, Pope Francis is saying, Pope Benedict is saying, Pope John Paul II was saying, we've got to embody the love that we say that we, represent and everything. And I think this is wonderful what you're talking about.
Thank you so much. I'm a big fan of Dorothy Day too. So the corporeal works of mercy,
Yeah.
like the first thing to remember is it's not an act of mercy. That's too solo. It's a work. It's a building up. And then those corporeal works of mercy are all the things that Dorothy did, feeding the hungry, uh, visiting the sick, clothing, and then her justice work too. She's there and standing up in solidarity. So Dorothy is a wonderful operationalization of this ethic that I'm describing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Elizabeth, did you mean to raise are
I
you
know we
raising?
need to go. Yeah, I find this so moving and so important right now, John, because we're in such a crisis of extreme individuality. I think, and I don't know, it sort of reminds me of when we saw Martha Hennessy speak, like it was, the week of the election, and this has given me another like feeling like I can breathe, like these these really helpful ways of speaking about what I think is such an issue. And it reminds me a lot of Brian Stevenson's work. I put that in the chat, but yeah, it makes me want to go back to Just Mercies. But thank you so much. Sorry, I know we're running out of time. I just wanted to thank you so much.
You're welcome, Elizabeth, and really everybody, especially you, Gino. Thank you for being here.
It was a great presentation. A lot of it was from class that we learned. So when I saw the space-time weight and flow chart, I was like, oh, wait a minute, I know this. Good reminder.
Yeah, I wanted to do more with them, but I only had so long. So maybe next time. Thank you, Gino.
Anytime.
Well, John, we just thank you so much. This was really wonderful, and I just enjoyed it. I know we all enjoyed it enormously. You're lucky to have him as a professor, and I think we're just all lucky to have him as a presenter. So thank you very much, and I hope I'll see you. I'm sure I'll see all of you around at some point before the semester's over. So anyway, have a great day, and thanks again,
so much,
John.
everybody.
Bye.
Have a good day.
Thanks.
Bye.
Happy finals.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.